Welcome. It is Wednesday, February 2nd, 2022. It feels like it's been a year the last month. I am Aaron McMahon. I am joined by Ryan Zook. We are the Michigan football beat writers from MLive.com. Uh, Big news evening, I guess you could say. It's been a big news last, I don't know, 48, 72 hours, however long you want to go back. It is official. Jim Harbaugh is returning as Michigan football coach. ESPN's Adam Schefter reported about an hour ago. I've confirmed it with Michigan. Jim Harbaugh will be back to honor his contract, as we thought. There have been reports the last 24 hours, give or take, that Jim Harbaugh was anticipating taking the head coaching job with the Minnesota Vikings. We didn't report that, but there's been a lot of speculation, a lot of things heading that way. Turns out Jim Harbaugh is not going to take the Vikings job. He is returning to Michigan, and we're here to discuss it. A lot to unpack, a lot to get into. But Ryan, it's been a wild last couple of days.
I mean, I'm just happy this saga is over, man. Like this past month has been like people out there saying these 75-25s he stays or goes 50-50. Then it starts to lean towards he's leaving for the NFL. And I mean, there was a reporter yesterday said that it was a done deal and he was headed toward to the NFL. And sure enough, today, Harbaugh seemingly heads to Minnesota and is coming back to Ann Arbor without a contract offer and is coming back to Michigan. So it's been quite the whirlwind. Still, it would be nice to know some more details, like if he was offered a contract by the Vikings, where the Dolphins kind of fit into all this. But bottom line is Michigan has its head coach for the 2022 season and beyond.
Yeah. We don't know whether Jim was actually offered the Vikings job and turned it down, or he just wasn't offered the job and he had no other choice but to come back to the University of Michigan. And we may not get an answer to that. But the facts of the situation are that Jim Harbaugh was in fact in Minneapolis today. He flew out there for an in-person interview with the Vikings. He was considered one of four finalists for the head coaching vacancy. And a lot of folks have been, had linked him to the job. They thought he was the front runner, the guy that was probably going to get the job. And there were reports out there, multiple outlets, saying that if Jim, in fact, was offered the head coaching job, he was going to take it. So that goes back to whether or not he was actually offered the job or not. But at this point, it's a moot point. He is coming back to the University of Michigan. He will be the head coach here in 2022 and beyond. Adam Schefter reported that Jim did, in fact, call athletic director Ward Manuel to inform him of his decision. And there was some interesting language. Adam Schefter reported that Jim told him this wasn't going to be an issue going forward, and he is willing to be the head coach at the University of Michigan until he is no longer wanted. So this sounds like this is a career defining move for Jim Harbaugh. There were some folks, not only this year, but previous years, who thought maybe Jim would one day take a stab and take a shot at coaching the NFL again. And at least, on the short-term basis, it sounds like he's sticking in the college game.
Yeah, Aaron, it looks like when we were trying to get this Facebook Live fired up here with their names in the correct boxes, that it looks like Harbaugh was reportedly not offered the job, and it looks like Minnesota could be closing in on a deal with Kevin O'Connell. So still not definitive there, but that would explain a little bit more into Harbaugh's decision. So, I mean, in your mind, how awkward do you think it will be for Michigan, for Harbaugh to come back to Michigan after all these reports, or do you think it'll be business as usual?
Well, he might have some explaining to do, at least with some of the assistants and folks on staff, and maybe in the department. By all accounts, he's been pretty transparent with the folks maybe he's needed to be transparent with, and that's recruits and players and the like. He hasn't shied away from telling folks privately that yes, he wanted to coach in the NFL again. So like, I think so whether folks may not agreed with it or maybe didn't want it to happen, they at least knew where he was coming from. But either way, he's got some things to figure out once he gets back here. Keep in mind, in the last month or so, Michigan has lost their defensive line coach Sean Nua, went to the University of Southern California for a similar job for Lincoln Riley, and he just lost his defensive coordinator Mike McDonald last week to the Baltimore Ravens. Now, Jim has made a hire. He did hire Mike Elston from Notre Dame to coach the defensive line. By all accounts, Mike is in Ann Arbor and recruiting and the like, but Jim still has to make a defensive coordinator hire. So that's got to happen here soon, with spring practice right around the corner. It's expected to start within probably the next 6 weeks, give or take. They got to move quickly. So there are some things to figure out. Michigan is losing a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball, and we'll get to that maybe later. That's another discussion for another day. But either way, I mean, Jim, it's a good thing. I think at the end of the day for the University of Michigan, it provides that continuity and that stability. I think that Michigan really needed to try and turn this into a long-term thing. Because look, if Jim Harbaugh had taken the Vikings job, Michigan was staring down the barrel of kind of a two-way street here. You either promote from within to try and keep everything stable, keep most of the coaching staff in place, and hope that you maintain most of the roster, or you look to the outside, bring in a new head coach, and then you risk blowing everything up. Everything they had accomplished the last 24, 12, 18 months in a way would have gone awry. So, some folks are probably sick and tired of this back and forth with Jim in the NFL, and I don't blame them. I mean, it's been a long last month. But I think they finally got some clarity today, whether you wanted it or not, I guess.
And the good thing for the Wolverines was they signed most of their recruiting class, 2022 recruiting class, during the early signing period in December. So there wasn't really much drama today on the recruiting front. They signed 22 prospects then, and they really didn't have much room to add. They did lose a commit today, a 3-star Cavante Henry, a linebacker from California, but he ended up signing with Oklahoma. But I mean, he was likely leaving regardless of what happened with Harbaugh. I know he was close with Courtney Morgan, the former player or director of player personnel at Michigan, who departed for Washington in December. So I mean, Michigan wasn't really in the mix for many more 2022 recruits anyway. So this does allow Michigan to now focus on 2023. Harbaugh can possibly quell some doubts that maybe some of those prospects had about him leaving. And the focus this sprint is going to be mostly on, obviously the quarterback situation will be big, but it'll be the defensive side of the ball, who takes over as defensive coordinator, how much of a scheme change they undergo under this new coordinator, and who's going to replace a lot of the key pieces they lost. So a lot to go on here. You're going on here heading into February, and a lot to discuss.
Yeah, a lot was made today, even this week, I guess, of Jim interviewing with Minnesota on National Signing Day, which was today. I thought it was a little
Way
overblown,
overblown.
just
Way
because, yeah, like
overblown.
you said, Michigan locked up most of its class back in December, so there weren't a ton of decisions to make. And really, if you go across the country, there's weren't a lot of commitments today. National Signing Day, while yes, technically is today, it's really gone to December in the early signing period. That's where the majority of the kids, lock up. So, I mean, you guys, you can say it's bad optics and everything else, but at the end of the day, it didn't really matter much. As I mentioned earlier, Jim seemed to be pretty transparent with those folks that knew of his intentions. In fact, there were reports that he gave the coaching staff the week off beginning today. So I don't think it changed much from a program perspective. They weren't going to accomplish much today anyway. But it's a big decision. Michigan, I guess you could say Michigan got a big commitment today from somebody in
There you go.
Minneapolis.
Very,
So
very true.
yeah, so it was a monumental day for everyone. I think because I think most of us expected Jim Harbaugh to jump ship and go back to the NFL, and then that would have obviously brought on a probably lengthy coaching search and giant upheaval at the University of Michigan. Instead, they get that stability back. I anticipate there not being many more, if any, changes with the coaching staff. And as of right now, there hadn't been any players that hit the portal yet either, from at least solely based off this decision. So, not a ton of collateral damage here. Jim Harbaugh will probably have some explaining to do, some folks, and I anticipate probably in the next couple of weeks we'll hear news of Jim signing a new contract.
Yeah, most
Keep in
definitely.
mind,
He's
yeah, I mean,
definitely in line for a raise. That's for sure.
yeah, I mean, remember he's in the second year of his existing 5-year deal he signed last January that and everyone's talked about halved his pay. He's due for a pay raise. I mean, he earned it this past year, got Michigan over the top, got them into the Big Ten championship, got them into the playoff, kind of did everything everyone expected Jim Harbaugh to do when he first got here to Michigan in 2015. Maybe it took him a little bit longer than folks wanted it to, but he did it. So I think he's certainly deserving of a raise. I suspect he'll get one here soon. And then all will be good. It's really ended a wild last month that really didn't stop. I mean, remember this began kind of early January when Jim was being linked to the Las Vegas Raiders job. And I think everyone thought that was going to be, if he was to go back to the NFL, that was a spot he would land. I mean, he knew the ownership. They have good situation there in Las Vegas from a player, personnel standpoint. There was no inclination or no announcement of an interview there. Jim had been linked to the Bears and Giants jobs. Nothing really came from there. And then we find out over the weekend that he was actually interviewing with the Vikings and plans to actually fly to Minneapolis for an in-person interview. That's when things get real and you start to think, okay, where there's smoke, there's legit fire, and he's interested in going back. Well, he did. He went through the process, went through the interview situation. Maybe we'll get more clarity here in the next coming days what ended up happening there. But nonetheless, Jim Harbaugh, flirted with the NFL, and is going back to his home.
Very true. Well, yeah, we'll have plenty of coverage up at MLive.com tonight and into tomorrow. Make sure you stay tuned, and we'll talk to you again soon.